Hi, everyone, and welcome to our second episode for the webinars that we are doing in partnership with the Richmond Olympic Oval. And we're excited to be here right on the Dega-Gautier First Nations and the Dega-Gautier Métis. So we have Evan today, and he will talk to us a little bit more about exciting things. So all over to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Thorsten. Let me know at any point if you have any trouble seeing my slides or anything. But my name is Evan Duxbury. I am the sport dietitian at the Richmond Oval. I've got a degree of microbiology from Simon Fraser University, and then I went back to school at University of British Columbia to do my dietitian training, and had the chance to work there for a full year with the football team there and a number of other clubs, which is a great place to learn. And since graduation, I've worked at the Oval, and I've worked with a number of clients and teams on an individual basis and group settings as well. And I really enjoy giving these types of talks because I know at the end, all the athletes I work with learn something, and in that sense, we can make you all better athletes. So I'm just gonna share all my slides, full page here. And yeah, Thorsten, just let me know if it doesn't look quite right, but otherwise I will carry on. So we're going to have about 20 minutes of content for you, and then we had designed about 10 minutes of questions. So I know we'll only have a couple of attendees on the call today. So if you do have any questions, we can talk about them at the end. But other than that, let's get started. So I think these days it's pretty well understood, the importance of nutrition in sports. But just in case there's any doubters out there, I like to start off with a few examples of professionals who have taken nutrition and used it for their advantage. So this is a picture of Alex Morgan, top American footballer. And so she's quoted here as saying, "What you put in your body is the energy and output that you're going to get." So that's very important for athletes. So she's referring here about how the food that you choose to eat really does kind of impact your performance. This is a photo of Vince Carter, who's quite a well-known basketball player, former Toronto Raptor. He's quoted as saying, "An athlete eating poorly is like putting regular gas in a Bentley. You want to put that super unleaded in it, that good gas." So again, referring to the quality of the fuel that you're putting into your body and to your motor is the kind of performance you're going to get out on the other side. And then lastly, this is a shot of Misty May Trainer, who's a gold medal winning beach volleyball player. And she's quoted as saying, "It's really important to eat breakfast, especially in the morning, and especially after working out. Whole foods are what your body needs." So she's talking here about fueling up as early as we can during the day and recovering after training or competition. And again, about making quality food choices. This is an example that I like to use to try and highlight the importance of nutrition among other factors. So on the vertical, let's just call this performance, whether it's the longevity of you in your sport or how good you are in the sport. And let's compare athlete B to athlete A. So athlete A has more physical ability. They're born faster, bigger, stronger. How on earth can athlete B catch up? And there's at least 3 modifiable factors that we're in control of here that we can use to kind of enhance ourselves as athletes. So as your coaches would for sure say, skill development is a big one. So the more time you spend working on the skill aspect of your sport, and table tennis is a very skill-heavy sport, that's going to make a big difference in your performance. How you take care of your body is going to make a big difference. Are you injured for your competitions, or are you sick? Is that kind of injury and illness preventing you from training the way you want? If you can recover and rest effectively, that's going to just give you more time to spend competing at your sport of choice. And then what we're talking about today, of course, is nutrition. So if you come into your competition fueled properly, your stomach feels comfortable, whereas your opponent maybe doesn't have their batteries charged or has a plate of fettuccine Alfredo rolling around inside of them, that's going to give you an extra edge as well. And so it really is an arms race, and I'm here to help you make sure that nutrition is something that helps you rather than hurts you. So this is an example that I like to highlight. So this is not a professional athlete, but a competitive rower who for years had trained without eating breakfast, but she made a small change with her nutrition. She started eating breakfast, a small breakfast to start with, and she gained energy to compete for much longer. She saw a change in her strength, and it was really only after this experiment that she realized she'd been operating with a half-empty tank. She assumed she was competing as normal, but didn't realize there was all this unlocked potential that she could access just by eating breakfast. But she, of course, found that she had more energy and more power throughout the day. So I'm hopeful that we'll kind of all grab onto some kind of realization like this. And it might take a little bit of experimentation, but usually there are some tweaks we can make for pretty much any athlete's diet. So I did search for famous table tennis players who were quoted about nutrition, but didn't find too much. So this is from Dr. Chandra Madho Singh, who is a table tennis pioneer in Canada, I'm told. So he talked about quite a few of these components in one of his papers. And for athletes of your age, certainly growth is something to consider. We want to make sure that you're growing to your full potential, and getting the proper nutrients into your body is going to help you do that. For sure, energy is something that you'll need for pretty much any sport. Table tennis, no exception here. Just like we talked about, if your muscles contain more energy, typically it's called glycogen. We'll talk about glycogen through this presentation. If you have your muscle batteries fueled up more than your competition, that's definitely only going to help you. When you think about table tennis, you don't really think about massive strength requirements, but certainly making certain shots, moving explosively does require a strength component. So thinking about eating the structural pieces of muscle, like proteins, in the right quantities will make sure that strength is available to you when you need it. I talked about having a plate of Alfredo sloshing around inside of you. If you've ever experienced, eating too close to competition or eating the wrong foods, I'm sure you felt some gastrointestinal discomfort or stomach upset, and definitely not going to help your performance. So if we can make sure we're eating foods to avoid that, that will only help. We're going to talk about hydration today, and a few of the ways that hydration is going to help you, certainly relevant to table tennis. We talked a bit about recovery in our player A, player B comparison. So how do we make sure that you're eating properly, set yourself up for the next competition or next training session? And then similarly, how do we make sure you're not getting injured and you're not getting sick? So the nutrition that goes into your body can affect all of these aspects, and as a result is critical for table tennis, even though, like I said, you don't think about massive muscle development, or you're not running a marathon. It's not hugely aerobically demanding, but nutrition still plays a very important role. So today we're going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk a bit about breakfast or any kind of pregame meal, and we're going to talk about hydration. So fueling ourselves up and making sure we have all the right lubricants, if we're using the race car analogy, to win the race. So I have here some examples of breakfast. There's obviously lots of choices we can make. We have an oatmeal type cereal, more of a processed Cheerios type cereal. Bacon and eggs is often quite common. You got your pancakes and waffles, peanut butter toast, and you got your yogurt and berries type foods. Of course, there's plenty of other options as well, but I also have here an empty plate because often athletes and non-athletes find it challenging to eat in the morning. They're not used to it, and as a result, don't eat until later in the day. And we'll talk a bit about how this could impact your performance negatively, and some strategies to try and bring breakfast back into your life. So what to eat for breakfast? Well, breakfast is important because overnight we are losing energy. Our muscles are twitching, our heart is beating, we're not eating. So we need to try and start getting energy back into our body so we can get it into our muscles in time for our competition. So if you wake up hungry, eat. That's great. That's easy. But like I said, some people don't. So if you don't wake up hungry, try to eat something within 2 hours. So we've got this timeline here. After waking up, try to get something in your body between 2 hours, within 2 hours waking. The trick to trying to get breakfast back into your life, if you're not used to it, is trying to start small. Just take a bite or two of a banana and then just move on. That's like progress for the day. And the next day, eat half a banana. See if you can eat that much. Work your way up to a whole banana, and soon you're eating 2 pieces of toast and a couple of bananas, and who knows what else, because your stomach can be trained to get used to that once again. So it's highly recommended for all athletes to eat breakfast, and if you're not eating it, this is what I would recommend to get it back into your routine. So what is an athletic breakfast? And this could be applied to almost any meal. What is an athletic meal? There's 4 components that we're going to talk about today. I want you to think about. So the first one is protein. So protein, as I think most people are aware, this is the structural component that makes up our muscles and allows us to do all the things that we do with our body. So we need to have this coming into our system on a regular basis. As a result, we want to have protein, at least breakfast, lunch, dinner, and maybe in a different talk, we'll get into snacks and things like that, but trying to get protein coming in regularly is great. So protein is found in foods like meats, eggs, dairy, nuts, things like beans, lentils, and then products that come from beans and lentils like soy, tofu, and tempeh. But typically, breakfast protein, you're thinking about eggs, dairy, peanut butter, those types of things. The second thing we're going to want to think about at breakfast or any athletic meal is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates is the energy source that's going to let us move around those structural muscle proteins that we build. So our muscles need energy, but our brain also needs energy. It loves carbohydrates. So these types of foods are the starchy foods or the sugary foods that we find in our diets. Things like breads, grains, potatoes and corn, lots of starch. Things like fruit and honey. In terms of natural foods, those are the kind of foods that would have sugars. So we have protein, we have carbohydrates, and there's one type of carbohydrate in particular that's really important, and it's whole grains, which give us something called fiber. So fiber is important for a number of reasons, but I think this graph here illustrates it really well. We have a red curve and a green curve. So the red curve is what happens if we eat some simple sugars like white bread or white rice. We absorb the energy really quickly into our blood, and our body overcompensates by creating a lot of a hormone called insulin, which sucks the energy out of our blood into our cells. Ultimately, this is good, but we suck so much of it out that we actually go kind of negative. We have less sugar in our blood than we started with. And this makes us feel weak. It makes us feel shaky and sweaty. We go pale. It's not a really good foundation for athletic performance. Whereas if we have fiber from brown breads and brown rice, those types of foods, that slows the absorption of sugars. So it gives us this nice green energy curve. So it's long-lasting energy. As a result, there's no energy drops. And this is exactly the kind of foundation that we want to build athletic performance on. The fourth component is fluids, or water primarily. So just like carbohydrates, we are losing water overnight. We're breathing it out. So we need to try and get it back in as soon as possible at breakfast. And we'll want to continue bringing water into our system throughout the day. So I have here some examples of some not very athletic breakfasts. This is butter on white bread. And if we were in a room together, I'd ask you to tell me how we could upgrade this meal. but because you're watching from home, I will tell you that we're going to want to add some protein. So there's some peanut butter, and we're going to want to add some fiber. So there's some brown bread, and we're going to want to add some simple carbohydrates in the form of maybe like a banana. So that's kind of an example of how we can upgrade a meal. Another example is Lucky Charms. So let's think about adding some whole grains, some fiber. So let's switch to like an oatmeal type breakfast. Let's add some simple carbohydrates in the form of raisins in this case. And then we also need, the last thing is protein. So for this, I added some Greek yogurt, and that gives us an athletic breakfast. As long as we have a glass of water on the side, we're hitting all 4 components. The last thing we're going to talk about today is just about a little bit about hydration. So hydration is important for a couple of things. Brain function, talked about brains liking sugar and carbohydrates. It also really likes water. You can imagine, we don't really think about our brain a lot in performance, but think about table tennis, trying to coordinate getting your hand to the right place to hit the ball. That is your brain doing that. Trying to pick up, spin on the ball, trying to figure out where you want to put your next shot. All of that decision making, obviously, when you think about it, is your brain. So the happier we can make your brain, it's going to have a positive effect on your performance. The second thing is cardiovascular performance. So thinking about your heart here. Your heart is pumping blood throughout your body all the time. Now imagine taking out a bunch of water from your blood. How thick and syrupy would that get? Potentially pretty thick. And so how much harder would your heart have to work if you have thicker blood? It would have to work a fair bit harder. And so in this situation, instead of sending oxygen and nutrients to your muscles, to your muscles in your arms and legs, you're spending a lot of time trying to fuel your heart. And it's not going to be working as effectively getting those nutrients to the rest of your body. So trying to keep your blood at normal levels of viscosity is going to pay off. And the last thing is core temperature control. So water is great for resisting changes in temperature. So if we can keep ourselves hydrated, our body's going to resist changes in temperature better. All of the enzymes in every system in our body are optimized to work at 37 degrees Celsius. So if you are running and gunning all day in a table tennis tournament indoors, there's a high chance that your core temperature would increase, and all of your systems, if there's any increase, are going to start working less well. So these are the benefits of hydration, and it's something that starts at breakfast and we continue to do all day, because obviously we're losing water the whole time. So there's a couple of questions to think about. The first is, how do you begin training? So if you come into training or competition and you're already dehydrated, it's going to be hard for you to catch up. You have to think about coming in a good hydration situation. And then the second piece is, how much do you lose during training? So if we come in a good situation, but we don't rehydrate throughout the session, we're still going to be dehydrated. So there's kind of 2 components we have to think about. We all sweat at different rates, so there's no real scientific measure, not an easy one anyway. So the best target is actually taking a look at the color of your urine. The goal is pale yellow color, and giving yourself enough time before you compete to pee out any excess. So you're not carrying around extra water if you don't have to. So there is math to kind of make recommendations for how much you should drink before a session or before a competition. And the math is 5 to 10 milliliters per kilogram of body weight, 2 to 4 hours before training. So if you're drinking 2 hours before, you would take the smaller number, about 5 milliliters per kilogram. And if you're drinking 4 hours before, you want to drink the larger number, about 10 milliliters per kilogram. Ideally, you kind of spread this out a little bit. Your body is a little bit like a garden. If you've ever watered a garden, blasting it with a bunch of water all at once doesn't really get absorbed very well, but a more gentle stream over a longer period of time gets absorbed much better. So if you weighed 180 pounds or 80 kilograms, this would look like 400 to 800 milliliters of water ahead of time. So I'd suggest grabbing a water bottle with volume measurements on it, so you can give yourself a target and you know how much you want to drink. And independent of how much you weigh, it's been observed that most athletes benefit from another 400 to 800 mils of water every hour that they're active. So that's something you can sip on throughout training or your competition. Do notice that we're drinking 2 to 4 hours before training. That gives us at least 2 hours to absorb and pee out any excess. So that concludes the content I had for you today. And we've given space for 10 minutes or so of questions. So I think Darren's on the line. So Darren and I think the swimming team is also on the line. Feel free to shout out any questions if you have them. If not, I do have some prepared here to just kind of wrap it up for us at the end.
Yes, and from swimming we have Jane here. So
Great.
if you have any questions, just let us know, and you can write them in the chat or you can unmute. Before that, I have a question in regards to, just drinking. Like, how can you, or what do you think is the easiest way to remind yourself of drinking? Because most of the time we just want to drink whenever we feel like drinking, but in preparation for competition, what do you think? How can we remind ourselves, or what's the best way to do that?
That's a great question. And I think it's more difficult initially when you're trying to establish the habit. Kind of like breakfast, once we're used to drinking a lot of water, I think it becomes easier. Some of the strategies I would recommend is if you carry a water bottle around with you all the time, that will help. It's going to be impossible to drink water if you don't have it. So get used to carrying it around before training, during training, after training. That would be step one for sure. The second thing is if you can use one that has those volume measurements on it, that gives you kind of a measure of how you're doing throughout the day. So I think that helps. And if you're really struggling, I mean, you could set a little alarm, like if you're leading up to a really important training session or competition, a little alarm that goes off every 15 minutes that just kind of buzzes and reminds you, oh, I better check and see how I'm doing on my water. But I think all of those are strategies I've seen used really effectively.
Yeah. And I actually have a water bottle that reminds me that I should drink something right now.
Perfect. It's working already.
Yeah, it is. Then here we have a question coming from Darren. He wanted to make sure that he understands correctly. Athletes should train themselves to eat a more substantial breakfast. Is that correct?
That's a good clarification, Darren. My primary intention with those slides was to make sure we're eating something at least. So if we're not eating anything, we want to make sure that we get those 4 components into our body as early as possible. Everyone's needs for protein and carbohydrate throughout the day are really dependent on their body shape and type. So I can't say that you need to eat more. I would guide you towards comfort. You don't want to really overdo it necessarily, but it might be worth checking in with your coaches as to what your goals are for your body, and if you need to change your body composition to achieve performance, that might be something that plays into how much you need to eat at breakfast. But if you're satisfied with your body composition and your coaches are as well, then I would not say that any changes are needed. Darren's follow-up question.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just saying, always well balanced. Yeah, so balance is important in all things, I would say. So protein, carbohydrates is important, but throughout the day, vegetables and fruits we haven't really touched on today. Kind of those food groups from the old food guide is something to keep in mind. So I would not recommend going out of balance. No, I wouldn't. So yes, balance is great.
And I think, to add to this is first of all, we need to be role models as coaches. And I think lead by example, that's one thing. What is not always easy, but I think that's the first one step. And then I think everybody else follows through. And if you say, everybody, let's grab an oatmeal right now, and here I make it actually for you, and then get started with that day, I think that's great. And then there's a nice question here. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Evan.
I was just gonna add on to that first and say that I think athletes, I don't know how connected you guys are as a team, but certainly athletes, when they spend time together, tend to pick up habits from each other. So like you said, if we all start eating breakfast, then I think that would catch on for the whole group.
Mm-hmm. So here, Jane, who's a swimming coach, she's saying morning training starting at 6 a.m. What time should we have breakfast? It is really hard to eat at 5 a.m. in the morning, and after eating makes a swimmer feel sick mid-session, not season, mid-session.
That's a great question, Jane. Certainly my performance was designed for most of the competitive athletics out there with don't train super early, but yes, rowing's one, swimming's one. I would say that it might be best to kind of break up breakfast into two sessions, maybe. Certainly, if you can get something in, maybe like a banana or half a Cliff Bar or a granola bar. From when I did swimming, I felt like I could handle that, and kind of getting used to the few bites before practice wasn't too challenging. But fitting in a full plate of breakfast might be a bit of a different story. But if you have that intention to kind of finish up breakfast, if you will, after your training session, I think that might be a really more achievable way to get a full breakfast in. If you can kind of plan for that, bring it with you to training if you have to, a peanut butter sandwich in your backpack. Or if you're coming back home after training, then just really making sure we're not skipping the rest of breakfast. But great question.
Yeah, I like that too. And to follow up on that is like, I always read, you should drink a glass of hot water in the beginning of your day. And I'm doing it and I enjoy it. Like, how does that work for you? Like, do you think that's the right thing to do, or is there any science behind it? Or is it just a fable tale?
That is a good question. I am not aware of any science behind that. Not to say that it's not out there; it could be, but I've never been faced with that question. From what I know of water, whether you enjoy it hot or cold, the performance benefits will come through in either situation. So I would say follow whichever temperature of water you prefer. But I'll do a little bit of research and see if there's anything I can find on that front.
That's great, thank you. And there's a follow-up from Jane. Jane is there an optimal digestion time or period before the training?
Optimal time to eat before training?
Yes, I think that's what it is. An optimal digestion time. So not just eat, but like when the food is actually digested, and then you can get started.
Yeah, so we didn't really dive into the traditional pregame meal in this talk, but there certainly are recommendations around timing and around quantities as well, based on your body weight. And potentially that's something we get into next week. But to satisfy your curiosity this week, typically the recommendation is to eat 1 to 4 hours before your big session. So leaving at least 1 hour to digest is kind of the gold standard. Again, this is something that you can get used to and train yourself to get more comfortable with. If that 1 hour time frame doesn't work for your stomach today, it's certainly something that you can get used to over a week or two. There are recommendations for quantities as well, but I might just leave that for next week, and then we can kind of show the numbers and get a bit more into the examples, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. And if we learn more later next week, that would be fantastic. Yeah. And if you have the examples too, as you said, that would be great. And then we know more about the hot water too.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So I think that's it for today. I really appreciate your time, and thanks everybody for joining in, and hopefully on the live stream as well, and everybody can watch it. And we also have the recording, and we'll share that on our YouTube channel and then on the website. So whenever anyone wants to to look at the video again, then they can. And there was a question, can we share your presentation as well? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think no problem with that.
Okay, good. So then we add that presentation to the website too, and then everybody can just download it, and we'll share that with all our sport and recreation partners after the webinar series, and then they have access to that as well. So again, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Evan, for taking the time to telling us more about nutrition. And I'm definitely looking forward to next week. So thank you very much.
See you then. Thanks, everyone.